Let's talk about juxtaposition. Idyllic beaches with warm sand and perfect oceans. Hordes of the undead screaming for your flesh. Relaxing with a cold drink and hot food. Bashing a man's brain in with a boat oar. A well-crafted, memorable trailer, and a mediocre series of zombie RPGs. This is the Dead Island franchise, and over the course of the next few videos, I'll be talking about all of them, what they got right, and the many, many things they got wrong, but all leading up to the exciting conclusion the series eventually led up to. To start with the first game, we of course need to go back to the reveal trailer from February of 2011. This is a prime example of why you should never, ever believe CG trailers, because there are few videos less representative of their final product than this. I remember reading articles about people tearing up over the footage of the little girl hurtling herself out of the window to avoid death by the undead, and it certainly generated interest in the game. There was even at one point talk of a movie based just around this clip, but thankfully that never happened. Several months later, the game launched, and before even getting to the gameplay, it was immediate. Something was wrong. Booting Dead Island presents you with the greatest sense of whiplash in video game history. Contrast the trailer with Who Do You Voodoo, the game's opening song.
I got a zombie army and you can't harm me.
Hey,
yeah,
watch it.
You voodoo, bitch. Drink blood like a vampire without warning. Who do you voodoo, bitch? Stand up. Sam B got the thing that go bump in the night. Whoa. Who do you voodoo, bitch?
That song is performed by the in-game character of Sam B, one of the playable characters you can select. Aside from the wash-up one-hit wonder, you have a failed football player, a failed policewoman, and a failed secret agent. Not really a fantastic sign when your choices are all awful to begin with. For the purpose of this review, I chose to play as Perna, the failed police officer, because Perna gets a gun, and this is basically the only way to complete certain sections of the game. I'll get to that later. After selecting your rejective choice, you awaken in your hotel room to the blaring sounds of alarm sirens. A short while later, you're introduced to the infected and informed that the island is overrun by zombies caused by a mysterious virus outbreak. Thanks to a quirk of genetics, the 4 failures are immune, and so they, meaning you, the players, are tasked with surviving and solving the issues of the few people left alive. Over the course of the campaign, you'll be tasked with helping the other survivors through a series of mostly fetch quests. Since you can't be infected, it's up to you to wade through the endless hordes and bring back whatever people need, be that useless crap to the occasional plot device. After a while, you get told that you're moving to a new location, and the cycle starts again. Repeat over the game's 4 or so locations till you're done, or just sick of the game and stop playing altogether. There is an attempt at the plot, but it barely holds together. There's some nonsense about finding a cure for the virus, as well as uncovering the insidious genesis of the outbreak, but it's all basically meaningless. The 4 player characters are unfortunately the most memorable people in the game, though every time they're shown in a cutscene together, it's a meeting of the minds that would leave the zombies hungry.
That asshole just said the exact same thing those motherfuckers at the police station did.
Things go to shit, and it's every fuckwit for himself.
There's really no meaningful twists or turns. The plot basically just serves as a vehicle to move you onwards from location to location.
That's it! Yes! Muchas gracias, amigos! Alright, here's your cut!
A weak plot would be fine if the gameplay could make up for it, but Dead Island's gameplay is really something else. There's a lot to be said for a game being experimental, and it earns credit for that. This was a somewhat earlier attempt at a mostly melee-focused first-person game, not counting dungeon crawler RPGs or the Elder Scrolls games. Every weapon has weight to it and attacks in a certain way. Heavy, blunt weapons send zombies flying and break bones, while bladed weapons hack off limbs and heads but don't last very long. All of this is balanced by the durability of the weapon and how much stamina it takes to swing, and you're encouraged to swap weapons constantly as you level up. When it works, the combat is fairly satisfying. Smashing a zombie's head open like a rotten melon is just fantastic, and standing over an entire horde you single-handedly cut to ribbons with a katana feels great. The issue is that it only sometimes works. The biggest problem here is the hit detection. It is all over the place. It's a combination of wonky detection, the zombies' reactions and animations, and the lack of depth perception the game's first-person view has. Making an attack land squarely just doesn't always work, and you're often left open for damage while making a fool of yourself. To make combat more exciting, there's the weapon upgrade system. Weapons themselves all have randomly assigned stats and descriptions, but as you go through the game, you can add things like fire or electrical damage, or even poison to stun enemies. Eventually, even the best weapons will break down, but this does let you add a little bit of personality to particular weapons to give yourself that slight edge against the horde. Melee aside, there is the game's shooting with a limited selection of guns. This might be one of the worst first-person shooters ever made. Guns feel sluggish and hard to aim, enemies that shoot back don't react correctly, and it's just horrid to play. The absolute worst part is for certain enemy types, guns are kind of the best answer. Special zombies specifically deal so much damage in melee that your best bet is to find something to stand on and just fire away. Ammo is supposed to be scarce, but by the end of the game, you'll be able to keep firing virtually non-stop without issue. And then there's the game's RPG mechanics, which kind of more or less get in the way. Dead Island uses a traditional approach to being an RPG. As you level up, you'll unlock points, which can be spent on perks. But these perks are more often than not just like totally useless. Occasionally, you'll unlock special attacks or bonuses to various stats, but a lot of them are just such minor upgrades to things you barely use, leading to a lot of point dumping as you just try to get the better perks later on. What you're left with is a clunky, weird, awkward experience that frankly goes on for too long. After the exciting opening of the beach resort, you're sent through the ruins of a rundown shantytown, followed by a slog in the jungle, and finally the punishing final level set in a prison. Each is worse than the location before it, and Dead Island is a fully muzzle-loaded game, losing a lot of its steam after just the first act. I didn't even mention the several hours spent in the sewers early on, in a section that manages to cripple the flow of the game worse than a sledgehammer to a zombie's kneecaps. Now, before I talk about the presentation, I should note something. Dead Island and Dead Island Riptide, for whatever reason, was the recipient of an HD re-release in 2016 to bring it to the X1 and the PS4. Don't play this version if you can avoid it. While they do things like remove the weird filter in certain areas and make vegetation look nicer, it also really messes with the lighting and honestly makes the zombies look worse. Even more bizarre, these versions seem easier, removing a lot of the challenge. If you are, for whatever reason, interested in these games, I highly recommend the original version, especially because they also tend to be a lot cheaper. With all that said, Dead Island is an insane mixed bag when it comes to presentation. 2001 was filled with some really fantastic looking games like Portal 2, Uncharted 3, Dark Souls, and LA Noire. Dead Island, by contrast, isn't all that great. There are some impressive elements here. The gore system on the zombies particularly is fantastic, and the use of lighting in certain areas really does add to the atmosphere, but by and large for the time, it really didn't push the graphical envelope. There's also a ton of weird camera filters applied all over the place, and at times the game can feel like you're playing it through a veneer of cooking lard. Sound isn't too much better. Combat does have a lot of weight to it, with the sound work for taking off limbs or heads satisfying enough, but the voice acting is pretty awful, and the soundtrack is bland and generic.
I'm Annie, and I'm looking for my teddy bear.
There's one more thing. My daughter can't stay here.
What?
Soon I won't be in my right mind. I don't want to hurt her.
She made a mistake. She was trying to do the right thing. Let's just take the supplies back to the resort and get her off the island. She doesn't belong here anyway.
I'll go look for the goddamn car.
Don't be sneaking up on people. Could have blown your bloody head.
The only real standout is that opening song, and that's great for all the wrong reasons. The one true positive thing I can say here is that the sound design for special zombies is exceptional. You can hear these things from a ways off, and they can genuinely inspire terror. Dead Island is also just plagued by bugs. Because the game renders your entire body, it's not uncommon to get stuck in the world. A lot. Actually, jumping in general just feels really awful too. And besides that, regular zombies get stuck all the time. Human AI is laughably dumb, and quest markers will regularly try to send you into nothingness. The only really stable part of the game seems to be multiplayer, but barely anyone is playing anymore, and frankly, barely anyone should play this. Dead Island on paper was a great idea. It's an open world zombie RPG set in a tropical paradise. But what it actually became was just far less impressive. It's weird, janky, and a frustrating mess of a game that doesn't really deliver on its basic promises. If there was any justice in this world, the franchise would have died there, a single failed experiment. But it didn't. So, join me next time as we take a look at Dead Island Riptide to see if they were able to salvage anything from this idea, or if the franchise is just a walking corpse.
That's all I have to say to you for now. People are waiting on me, and I have things to do.